Siamak. It's great to chat. Why don't you start by telling us, tell us about your company, tell us about UT8, and what are you working on?
Yeah, at UT8 we are building devices that would allow 4 billion people in the world who are not connected to internet to be able to connect to satellites and receive high-speed internet through satellites.
So you're building a hardware company. I have a little bit of experience with that. How did you decide to start this company?
Yeah, I've been through the pain of not having this product as a customer of this product when we were building satellites at the previous companies I worked for. I worked at SpaceX and then at Astranis, which is also a YC company, building satellites. And over we observed that we are building these amazing satellites that go to space and provide internet, but then underground the technology is actually way behind the space segment. So decided to start a company to solve that problem.
You went through startup school in 2019.
Yeah.
How did you hear about startup school, and when did you decide to join?
Yeah, actually, I heard about startup school through an old friend that he was telling me that he's been wanting to start a company for many years, and then he wanted to actually get into YC, and he couldn't. But then instead, as a replacement, he did a startup school. And I was just thinking about it, and then one day, my wife and I were out actually in Hayes Valley in San Francisco, and we were sitting there having coffee, and then that was the last day, the deadline for joining startup school, and I just decided, okay, let's do it, and just signed up right there in the park. And it was really just a motivation, a forcing function for myself to actually start this, because I've been wanting to start this company for many years, probably like 3-4 years, ever since I started working at SpaceX. And that was really the moment.
So were you working at another company when you decided to start working on this, or had you already?
Yeah. No, I was working at Astranis, and I wanted to basically leave and start this, but I wasn't really ready. I wasn't feeling ready because it's just scary. And I thought, okay, maybe this is a way for me to actually understand what it takes to start a company. I had seen people doing it. I had friends and colleagues who had done it, but it's like such a scary thing if you haven't done it yourself. You just feel like it's something others do and not normal people like yourself. So I thought this can be really my way of learning more about the reality of starting a company.
When you did startup school, what were some, there's a lot of lessons that you can read. You can read a lot about startups on the web. There's tons and tons of blog posts. What did you learn in startup school that you think was unique or interesting that you didn't know before?
I think the hardest thing about starting the company and even to date is telling others what your company is and what is it that you want to build, and hearing about their reactions and their understanding of what you're building. Of course, you, Eric, you've helped us so much, going through YC, but still, to date, I feel like, that is one of the hardest things that, okay, what is UT8? What is it that we are building? So startup school was really the start of that recognition and understanding that, okay, I have a lot of, work to do to actually be able to tell others what this problem is, why am I doing this? Because, we met with these random founders in all sort of companies, nothing to do with what we were doing, and we had a minute to tell them what is it that we are building, and that was really eye-opening to me. And I would spend really a good amount of time each week to prepare myself for the next meeting that I'm going to have with other founders, and that was really a very interesting experience for me.
You had the benefit of doing startup school before applying to YC. Do you think that startup school helped prepare you for the YC application or the YC process?
Yeah, in terms of getting ready for basically applying for YC and getting into that, startup school was absolutely beneficial because, of course, I took it very seriously in terms of submitting the weekly reports and answering all those questions. What is the hardest thing about what I'm doing? For example, a very simple question that I've been preparing an answer for that for weeks throughout the startup school. And when it came to actually applying to YC, almost the same questions would show up, that okay, why are you doing this, what is hard about it, what is the hardest thing about it, how are you handling customers. So basically the questions became more and more familiar to me, and I was less surprised by the application process because of the startup school.
How different was YC from startup school? Like, what did you get out of the YC process that you didn't get out of startup school?
I think the level of seriousness is very different, because at startup school, I think most of the people I met were basically at the same time working at a different company. That dedication was there kind of in terms of intention, but in terms of practicality, people were still kind of on the fence. Do they want to do it or not? And at YC, it's very different. You are around these people that have basically given up, everything else that they have, maybe great jobs at different companies and opportunities to join, famous big corporations, and they really want to do this thing that they're passionate about. So the level of energy, the level of seriousness, the level of passion, is really like not at the start of a school, and YC is the place that actually gives that to you.
As a hard tech founder, you're not building just software that you can upload to AWS and sell to people. You're building something that has silicon, that has hardware, that works with satellites. It's complicated stuff. How did you, as a hard tech founder, experience startup school? Like, do you think that it was helpful? Was there anything special? What would be your advice to other hard tech founders going through startup school?
Yeah, absolutely. It was going through a startup school was useful for me as a hardware founder, starting a hardware company, because it really tells you that businesses are very much similar. So that's kind of the important lesson learned, that as a hardware company, you still have to deal with customers. You still have to sell. You still have to be able to tell a story. There is like so much similarity between various types of businesses and companies, that if you actually really get those and understand them, things become much simpler. Because at hardware companies, typically you think all that matters is really like building this amazing hardware that is very complicated. You're solving major problems, but then because it is very complicated, you typically kind of put aside the selling part, put aside actually the customer needs part. You just go to customers very late in the process. Going through a startup school, it was really interesting for me to see that, of course, being challenged by the questions that, okay, I'm building a hardware, it's challenging and all that, but that is not really what makes a company interesting or attractive or successful at the end of the day. The questions are all about the market, it's all about, what customers need. So that part, was really surprisingly identical between like a complicated hardware or a rather straightforward software, or a complicated software. It doesn't matter what it is that you're building, but the core business side was very, very similar. So that was really like an interesting forcing function for myself to come out of my comfort zone. And people who were just founders who were just talking to me, they weren't interested to know about all the details of the hardware I was building. They were interested in knowing, okay, why do we need another internet company? Why do we need satellites to begin with? And those were really shocking in a good way for me, and I managed to kind of learn slowly to answer those questions.
Wow, that's a pretty solid explanation of kind of how I would recommend hardware companies think of it. I couldn't have written that better myself. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
My last question, did you meet any interesting people in startup school that you remember through the group sessions or through the forums or anything else?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there were two types of interesting people. One were, of course, other hardware founders, and knowing that basically I think the most useful thing that I got out of the people I met is that I'm not alone. And I think that is really such an important feeling to have, that okay, regardless of how hard your job is, or the product you're building is, there is someone who's building something that is harder to build. For example, I mean, in our batch we had people who are building like airplanes, drones, all sort of things that, again, in terms of complexity, I now I can really say that mine is probably 10 times easier to build. And I never thought about that, because before joining YC, I had this, I don't want to say pride, but this thing that, hey, I'm building something that is really, really hard. But then you see that, okay, no, even if you think you're building something really hard, there are people who are building something harder. So that kind of makes you feel less alone and kind of more motivated, that okay, there are hard things, people are building them, and they're successful at the end of the day, and they're not giving up. So that was really important for me, and we are still like in contact. We actually ended up helping each other a lot. When it came to raising our seed round, we introduced ourselves to other investors. One thing I learned was that the best type of introduction come from portfolio companies to investors. So people who have already received money from an investor, and they're recommending someone who's like themselves or better. So that was something that really helped us. At least like there are 2-3 companies that we have that relationship with. And then there were other type of really interesting people in our batches that were doing something totally different, mostly like software related. But I learned a lot from them on how they were actually presenting their companies. For example, at the meetings we had, seeing how motivational they can be, how passionate they can be, in talking about what they're building. And that was really like a constant education for me every week.
Cool. Well, this is super awesome. I kind of wish that I spoke to you about startup school like months ago. I think that you've really been able to sum up a lot of the like core lessons of why it's so valuable, even for founders who are in Silicon Valley and are like, you were literally part of another YC company. Like you're right in the ground zero of this, and yet it's still, you expressed how it helped you. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, that's it. We got our segment. That's awesome. If you could, hopefully just